Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And we're here today with you that I'm going to cut off.
What a fucking douche move. Yeah. Right out the gate.
We're the show that hates our guests.
You told her how we were going to do it, and you fucked it up.
In my defense, that was like an hour and a half ago.
It was 13 minutes ago. I have a timer here.
So who the hell are you on? I'm not used to a third voice.
I'm everybody and nobody. Also known as Kelly Bristol.
That's fuck. Brain broken. She got philosophical. Restart the show. Yeah, we decided that turns out that when me and Steve run a show, it doesn't go well. So we hired on help.
Hired.
Kelly,
I get paid for this? Yes.
That's not what I said.
You said hired. Said hired.
Yeah, but that can mean so many things. When you go to get your check, any sort of accident can happen. I can't predict the future, Kelly. The bridges collapse.
The postal system is so unreliable these days. So checks in the mail, though.
Yeah.
Are you implying that I should make sure that my life insurance policy is up to date?
I'm just saying that there might be a 25-barrel cannon gun lined up.
Way to tie into the last week's episode, Ben.
Yeah. But yeah, Kelly's been a friend of ours for a few years now.
Longer than anybody should be friends of ours. Really.
Too long.
One of our earliest supporters when we started this show, which we appreciate and we're very confused by.
I'm still confused by the entire format of this podcast, to be honest.
Oh, there is no format. That's the beautiful thing.
It's a show about nothing. No. But yeah, she's gonna just sit in with us today. But we are gonna have her on again to, we're gonna let you warm up, but eventually you gotta bring a goddamn topic onto this show so we can have a week off.
Right. If you want that imaginary paycheck, you've got to do some work, some non-imaginary work.
It's not imaginary. It's a real paycheck. It's an exact percentage of our royalties, which is fuck all.
Well, fortunately for you guys, I'll be able to bring the actual historian side to future shows. So
that's going to throw us way off because
I know.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm super nervous ever talking about history with you on because I feel I never know when I'm going to hit something you actually know about. And the only
back in 1884 there was this family in New Zealand called and she'll be like, no, there wasn't.
It was 1940 and you're completely wrong.
Well, fortunately for you both, I went far enough with my history degrees that I have a very niche subject area. So you guys are probably safe.
I just, if there was any benefit to starting the show with Steve is that I was guaranteed to have a co-host who would not know what I was talking about on any given day. And so I didn't have to fact check. But I'm still not going to. I'm going to, I'll let you do the heavy lifting on that if I ever step on your toes. Last week, I mentioned it before. We talked about the Giuseppe, our good buddy Giuseppe, who built a 25-barrel cannon that blew up in his face, quite literally. And Steve?
Yeah, he seemed to hit everybody except his target. Although
he hit him, but it didn't do anything except give him a bruise.
And he's like, ow.
Meanwhile, his face was blown off.
That is just going to wreck his hair.
Yeah, it looks bad on the stats sheet on the back of your assassinations collector card.
Yeah, I wonder, because he ended up getting guillotined for the attempt, and I wonder if by the end he was just sort of like, fuck, take the head off. I can't look at it anymore.
Wouldn't it have been poetic justice if the guillotine fell down and just hit him, but just bruised him?
Ow. Fucking ow. And he's just stuck there. But yeah, I talked about that. You I always forget what you talk about, even though you just mentioned it. Barry Brennan.
Yeah, Bremen, guy who just loved sneaking into sporting events by like dressing up as professional athletes and just like walking onto the field to various degrees of success, mostly non-success. But
for him, that was the success. He was a weird fucking bastard.
Weird dude. Seemed like a good dude, but just weird. I
don't know about good. Interesting for sure. See, good spirited, pain in the ass is how I look at him.
Yeah, stadium security probably did not think, oh, this is a pretty good guy. They're probably like, this fucker again. Jeez.
So yeah, those were the topics last week. If you've never listened to the show before, me and Steve and now Kelly, we get together every week and just tell each other random stories. They're not really set to any sort of topic. They can be fact, fiction, history. I have a little bit of science today, which I'm excited about because we never do that, even though we've talked about when we were starting the show, we were talking about like, oh, we could talk about science stuff too. And like, we fucking never do.
No, we fall in the pit of like botched murders and like not botched murders. Like if there's not killing involved, it's yeah.
I could talk about plate tectonics, or I could talk about this real piece of shit from 1750. So today, I wanted to talk about the Dragon's Triangle, which is kind of what it sounds like. It is the Bermuda Triangle, but for Japan.
For dragons.
Yeah, for dragons. So story really this area kind of became well known for Japan in the 13th century because Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Kahn, had conquered a large portion of China and was hoping to expand the Mongolian Empire by attacking the southernmost main island of Japan, Kyushu. So he amassed this great fleet of Chinese and Korean ships, and it ended up being one of the largest armadas the world had ever seen up to that point, supposedly carrying more than 140,000 sailors. He made two separate attempts to invade, once in 1274 and again in 1281 AD. On both attempts, he lost numerous ships and around 40,000 crew due to typhoons that occurred when they went through this Dragon's Triangle. While it didn't completely wipe out his fleet, it took away their massive numbers advantage, and throughout history, you see like anybody who's defending their land from an invading force tends to, if there's no real numbers advantage, they tend to be able to fight them off.
It was easier to defend than to attack.
You're right. So Japan was able to hold them off both times, and you have to like imagine that Kublai was like, well, that's unlucky, like in 1274. And then when it happened again, it was probably more like, okay, fuck them and their fucking haunted ocean. Forget it.
They've got some typhoon machine. Right. Bastards.
So these events were actually kind of where the whole idea of like kamikaze originated for Japan. They believed like these divine winds had saved them and their country, and that became a like propaganda tool for them for centuries. Like Japan never really had to defend their own land until the 20th century after that point. And even then they were naming their, famous pilots after those divine winds.
I love how like science works back then, where it's like, oh, the storms that we have every year. Well, they divinely came this year and saved us.
Well, that's they have so much. There's so much myth packed into this triangle, and this was just one of them. Here it was just like, oh, the gods favored us and gave us these horrible winds that sent them away. Now, a lot of historians and experts say that like, the damage that these typhoons did is actually overestimated, and that really it was just a very brilliantly defended example from the Japanese. But, it's not as good of a story. I think historically you see a lot of times populations it's better if there is some sort of supernatural force watching over you than to just say like, well, our military sure did it. So now it's worth mentioning the Dragon's Triangle is not entirely set geographically. Its location starts around the Japanese island of Miyake, but like any sort of paranormal area, people tend to dispute the actual boundaries of it, which I always find hilarious because it just means you get to stretch those boundaries anywhere something weird happened.
It's the entire Atlantic Ocean, or I guess that would be Pacific. I'm good at geography.
Yeah, it's the entire Indian Ocean, Steve.
That damn Mediterranean Sea and its Devil's Triangle.
But so Miyake is like the top point, and it spreads out downward. And now the area has just this reputation for waters that are just so dangerous that even the strongest vessels can go into there and just never be seen again. So Kublai's failed invasion was where the sort of legend of the Dragon's Triangle was really established. But fables related to this area of the ocean had existed well before that, because like fishing vessels would just disappear. And so people sort of developed this idea that dragons actually lived under the sea here and would spring up and attack the vessels to satiate their hunger. In the 1800s, another common myth about the triangle was sailors seeing a lady who was just sailing a ship on her own, and that the ship like looked like traditional incense equipment, which is such a very specific ghost ship.
Right.
Like, it's really confusing to me, but that's what people claim to see. And then supernatural ideas about this area continued all the way up into the 1900s. In 1944, a Japanese pilot named Toshiaki Lang claims that he caught sight of a sea monster during an aerial battle. He said it was serpent-like, swimming quickly with its head aloft. It had 2 huge triangular wings it was using to navigate the water and was supposedly 150 feet long. You know, and you and me, Steve, talked about it before, where it's like you're seeing a creature from a distance and you're just able to immediately ballpark a length for it.
Yeah. I mean, I would give aviators a little bit of, like, they tend to be pretty good at judging distances, especially if you're bombers and stuff, because it was important.
Sure.
But it's still the human eye and human brain. Like, it's real easy to get confused on your proportions on stuff.
And as some moving quickly in the water that you like, and you're moving quickly. It's just one of those things where it's like, almost the more specific you get about a monster, the less true it seems.
Exactly. And, to say nothing of optical effects.
Right.
Tricks of light, things of that nature. So, I mean, to be that specific is really...
Yeah, and
really
also
suspicious in itself.
Also, you're in a
his
battle.
name was Doug. I talked to him for 5 minutes.
You're gonna go down the river there. You're gonna run into a feller named Mike. He knows just how big that snake critter is. But yeah, it's also you're in a naval battle. It could be fucking anything happening in the ocean. Like it was an aerial battle for him, but who knows what was happening in the ocean.
I mean, hell, he could have just been terrified and hallucinating.
Yeah, he's Toshiaki Lang, high as fuck. All of his fellow soldiers said so.
If he's a kamikaze, isn't that also a drink in Japan? Well, anywhere really. Like,
yeah. Well, he might not have been a kamikaze. Those were especially crazy pilots.
I just wanted to make an alcohol reference. Yeah. That's what I do.
And takes another drink. So the thing is, only Lang is the only person to claim to have seen this thing. So you kind of have to take his story with a grain of salt. Like Kelly said, there's a lot of factors that can go into a fucking wartime pilot seeing some shit. But at least it's a better story than Blonde Bigfoot. Get your shit together, Canada. So in the 1940s and 50s, a large number of fishing vessels and supposedly over 5 military vessels just disappeared in the sea. When Japan sent a research ship to investigate what happened, the research ship met the same fate. The wreck of the research ship was found eventually, but no sign of the 31 crew members was found with it. After this, the government declared the area dangerous for marine voyaging and transporting goods, and oddly enough, any efforts to figure out why this shit was happening here was abandoned entirely.
Well, I mean, I give them credit for that because how many movies do you watch where they're like, oh, something deadly's happening, go check it out, and they're just like, fuck that,
It's fucking ghost.
Yeah.
let's just not go there.
Exactly.
It's fucking incense woman. Don't go in there. But yeah, it was
Do you
kind
smell
of
sandalwood? Oh shit!
like we were talking about the Battle of Verdun, and where like France just kind of was like, nope, fuck it, don't go in there.
Yeah, just abandoned property, basically.
Yeah, but eventually, you know, like anything, we human curiosity does return, and they did start researching what is happening here. I assume drinking and sailing have something to do with it, but there's actual numerous explanations for what could be going on. Some scholars suggest that the hot and cold currents crossing the triangle create electromagnetic disturbances that trap ships as they're passing through, which is probably a true, very scientifically sound possibility. But if you're like me, as soon as you hear the word electromagnetic, your brain kind of shuts down and you just assume somebody's bullshitting you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you say that, I picture ghost hunters.
Right. Like it's such a... It's such an overused con man term where it's like, oh, we're gonna kickstart the electromagnetics in your heart, and that'll make you feel love more. Yeah, like it's that type of like. It doesn't sound like a word that should exist. Another hypothesis suggests that subsea volcanoes could explain the disappearance of ships. The eruptions could initiate the accidents and lend explanation to those ancient stories of dragons destroying and sucking ships down into the ocean. Other research claims that there is some interesting environmental phenomenon at work within the triangle, where the area has a presence of methane hydrates on the seabed. So when methane hydrates gas explodes, bubbles form on the water surface, and ice-like deposits separate from the bottom of the ocean at the same time. All this activity under the ship and on the surface of the water can interrupt the ship's buoyancy, I guess, and just destroy a vessel without even so much as a gentle breeze. It's like, what the fuck's
Just
going
like,
on? And
yeah, you just
next thing
suddenly
you
you're
know,
at the bottom of the ocean. Like,
next thing you know, like your ship's falling apart, and you're like, what the fuck happened? Which has to be very terrifying. I would assume supernatural forces at work at that point, because I'll never remember methane hydrates again after the show.
well, right before our ship went down, I thought I smelled methane hydrate.
That was just your dog.
I snorted some methane hydrates, and then next thing you know, the ship sank. But it's okay, because there's always a paranormal activity theorist to explain things away. In 1989, Charles Berlitz wrote a book called The Dragon's Triangle, where his detailed research showed that the accidents involving 5 missing Japanese military vessels could only be explained due to the evil nature of the sea.
I love that they always put... You always get that with paranormal stuff. It's like, well, it can only be explained by this thing.
Yeah,
That's never been recorded.
I'm just saying, you mess with Poseidon, you get the trident horns. That's
Right.
how it works.
just a giant spear shoots out of the water. It's the only thing that can explain it. So this was refuted by author Larry Cush, who pointed out that these ships didn't just disappear, and that a lot of Charles's details were way off. It was mostly fishing vessels rather than military ones that were lost, and that the fishing vessels, like, it can be explained that a fishing vessel's destroyed way more easily because they have to sit around in these really dangerous waters for a long time trying to catch
And they're
it.
not necessarily equipped for those waters.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
And so also they find the wreckage most of the time, and so even the explanation of like just being unlucky enough that an undersea volcano erupts right underneath you is way more likely than just like evil triangle water. Like,
yeah.
So while the fantastic stories of dragons, ghost ships, and disappearances certainly make for, an entertaining read, the truth is that the Dragon's Triangle is just a very active, pretty damn dangerous environmental area in the ocean. Fortunately, modern ship design, along with weather and tectonic force monitoring, make navigating it much safer today. So take your little sailboat and go out there to Japan's ocean and
I'm going to kayak around in circles, knowing that
combat canoe right into the Dead Sea, you know.
You guys go ahead and do that, and I will wait here in the safe comfort of my home.
You have
and you just send me a letter, a bottle message.
You know, I'd be that asshole like Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump up at the top of the mast, like, come and get me, dragons.
And I would just be shooting at you with an air gun. Like, maybe if I hit him, he'll fall in.
But Lieutenant Steve, you ain't got no brains.
Steve, you have stolen honor. You're not a lieutenant. It's also worth noting that teams are still diving and discovering fascinating wreckage in this area, often with notable historical significance. That's how we know about Kublai Khan's fleet. We don't know anything about his feet.
They found his shoes.
He might not have any. So
definitely not now.
So yeah, they're finding remains of ships. It's actually a really interesting area. And it's also interesting because it's like, you have to imagine it's only a matter of time before they dive too deep. When they enter a dark part of the ocean that has been claimed by a dragon that dwells in this hidden depth from a forgotten time, and it awakens, and basically a Godzilla movie happens.
I was going to say, somebody just watched The Meg or something.
Damn it, Ben. You just spoiled the entire plot for the next Dragon Age game.
That's well, then they owe me money, don't they? Because I just wrote that. No, I think, you know, that shit is like, I really always love seeing like how older societies try to interpret, like, you know, they don't know what the fuck, you know, methane hydrates are. So it's like, but right. A dragon makes so much sense to them.
Well, what's interesting to me about it is how many obvious parallels there are between the Dragon's Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle, even in the explanations. Like, as we like mature technologically and scientifically, you know, we get these different explanations, and really I've heard much of the same being used to explain the Bermuda Triangle, the bubbles, not so much the volcanic action, because that one's close enough that we'd feel the, you know, earthquakes from it, but the crossing of different, you know, cold water and warm waters creating like sinkholes and all sorts of stuff. But anyway, it sounds like going from myth to like these explanations has been a very similar path between the two, but it's just because they're, you know, shipwrecks aren't an unusual phenomenon. Like, I think people have a hard time grasping how many ships throughout history have sunk.
Yeah.
Right. There's so many more shipwrecks than we have record of. So, I mean, even, you know, I live down in Florida, and we are constantly getting news of wrecks being found off the coast of the state that were previously undocumented and unaccounted for. So there's probably a lot more lost vessels than we even consider in these cases. And I think going back to the Bermuda Triangle, Steve, I think I remember reading recently that the analysis of incidents occurring within that triangle versus incidents occurring outside of that triangle, statistically, it was not significant.
Right. I've heard the same thing. It's just that it was a highly trafficked area, so it felt like there was a...
Yeah.
And it's like saying that there's way more car accidents on the road than there are in my backyard. It's like, well, that's where the cars are.
But also, like, you know, you have to remember, like, you know, a lot of probably the myths around these areas, like the Dragon's Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle, you know, like, they start with this huge buffer of stories, even though they're not, like, verified or whatever. Like, so ships just going missing, it was a lot more common to them because they didn't have the resources to go find the wreckage, you know,
right.
Like, so it's just stuff like those things did just disappear to them. And then, like, you know, as time goes on, you're not going to look for them because you already feel like you solved it. The ship went missing.
Yeah. The dragon got it.
Yeah, dragon ate it.
Well, that's the other interesting thing is how as humans we always look for like, well, we need the one explanation for why all these ships, when in reality there's probably a million different, like each shipwreck has its own reason why it went down, but we want to have like the one thing that's causing them all.
Right.
Right. And it's, you also have to consider, too, that people tend to not want to own up to their part or a person's part in an accident like that. So they're looking for some kind of supernatural explanation because, heaven forbid, their loved one made a mistake.
Right. I feel you blaming me for this, and I'm not taking...
I mean, even geographical areas aside, I mean, the Sargasso Sea is also another... It's a real place, but really romanticized in a fictional capacity as far as being a dangerous area. It's just got a lot of seaweed. It's not like the seaweed has become sentient and is pulling ships down to the bottom. It's just,
but what if that seaweed is just like the hair of some horrible giant Medusa creature?
Right.
It's gonna come out. Like that is an interesting point, and I think like part of the draw, like me and Steve have talked plenty of times on this show and our last podcast about like how into pirates and like naval stuff we are. But we are. I don't know why I held that like an asshole, but it is because it is so easy to romanticize, and like the facts of it are cool, but the stories of it are so much fun because it is this area that unless you're like sailing all the time like one of those like crotchety ass deadliest catch captains, like you don't know much about the ocean, so it's not as defined as like the land is for us. So like when you go out into the ocean, you do kind of start buying into these ideas like, well, anything could happen out here, so it is kind of fun, but like most things, there are real reasons for why, like a shipwreck is not a fucking crazy thing to happen.
No, especially not when you were dealing in times where wooden vessels were far more common. Any number of things could happen. Shipworms can degrade the structural integrity of the hull.
You mean dragon worms?
Dragon worms, yes.
Now just imagining a dragon that just like coughs up worms on you instead of fire.
Ew.
So yeah, that's what I got this week. I'm done. I did my part.
You're done. You're out.
Yep.
It's interesting. My stuff this week, I actually came up with one and I went through and did all the notes, and then I thought, screw it, I'm going to use this opportunity. If you listen to the show, we kind of referenced it, but months and months ago, I think it was only our like 5th or 6th episode in, I had a topic, and it was one of my favorite topics I've had, like even still. But then due to my own incompetence with computers, I lost the audio file. We had to completely record and whatever. So I'm going to go back and redo that story now that we finally have some fresh ears. So you've heard this one, Ben. Kelly, you may or may not have heard of it, but you haven't at least heard my...
Many months of drinking later, I have not heard this story. So please continue.
Well, that's going to be the fun part. That's what I was going to mention, too, is that I have not looked at these notes since I did that show. So, so this will be, it might be new to me. Like I'll get through and go, that didn't really happen.
Wait, I wrote this.
So in 1932, like in much of the world, Australia had been trying to cope with the influx of retired soldiers and a struggling economy following the end of the First World War. Many Australian soldiers had turned to agriculture, and if you can imagine farming in a hot, dry, everything is poisonous place like Australia, it's difficult. So to stimulate the industry, the government had been promising subsidies on wheat, but those subsidies were never able to make good on those promises. And with America's Great Depression in full swing, the price of wheat just kind of fell through the floor anyway. So farmers were all struggling to make a living. To make matters worse, the Australian crops were being decimated by a plague of birds. Of course, this is Australia, so we're not talking about like hungry crows or wild turkeys.
We're talking about spiders with wings.
Spiders. Not that bad, but they were being ravaged by thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hungry emu. So if you're not familiar with the emu, they are large, flightless, ornery, and not particularly handsome creatures.
Emus are assholes, okay? I mean, yeah. I grew up in North Dakota farm
on an
kid,
emu ranch.
Friends with farm kids, and one of those farm kids, believe it or not, had a half dozen emus, and I hated every single one.
Why anybody would have them on purpose, I've never figured that out.
Me either.
Yeah,
there was some naturopathic crap about emu oil. I don't even know.
I love that, like, oil of anything is magical. Like, it used to just be the snake oil, and now it's like, here's some pig oil.
Yeah, if we had a video podcast, this would be the point where it reveals that I've been an emu this whole time. And I just one single tear falls down and I hang up the call.
You're making fun of me again, Mom.
And my emu oil.
So anyway, they're slightly smaller than an ostrich. They only reach like 5 or 6 feet tall, weighing up to 130 pounds.
But they have just as big of a heart.
Well, their necks and their heads aren't bald like ostriches are either. So they look a lot, to me anyway, they look way more menacing than ostriches, even though they're slightly smaller. Because they look thicker and just more like, I don't know, stay the fuck away.
Because believe it or not, I knew people who had ostriches as well.
What the hell is wrong with North Dakota?
Well, I mean, I'm a product, so I mean that should tell you everything.
As we all know, like when an emu reaches maturity, they get a dark cloak.
I love that you're on and I can make fun of North Dakota because I live in Ohio, and to be honest, there was a house not far from us that had emus, and I'm sure people had ostriches around too. So Ohio's no better, but I can pin this on you, Kelly.
Well, I mean, do I tell you guys now or later that the ostriches actually belong to the town mayor?
Mayoral ostriches, fancy.
Well, that's how he got elected. He was like, "Wow, you can control the emus. You are king."
Well, he had the ostriches. It was someone else entirely. My ex-fiance's farm neighbor who had the emus.
Okay.
And it was like 6 of them.
So now I'm imagining this like deep blood feud between the mayor's family and your ex-fiance's family, the emu ostrich showdown.
No, nothing like that. But I will say those emus could not be contained, and they were constantly on the loose. Like, we'd be driving down a road, imagine a prairie road, dirt road, no one for miles, many dozens of miles, all alone, driving along, and then all of a sudden, just out from the side, this emu comes flying at you, and it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
was that a blonde Bigfoot?
See, like, you're talking to a guy who like went for a hike once with his friend, and like a fucking deer got on the path, and I almost pissed myself. So, like, I don't know what I would do to deal with an emu.
Play dead. No, play alive. I don't know.
No, just piss yourself, and then it'll know you're weak and leave you alone.
I mean, in North Dakota, deer are totally common. Like, you'll see those they're in your yard all the time. They're just hanging out. They're good friends. When we piss ourselves is when the moose show up.
Yeah, well, we have like deer are super common where I'm at too, and like I'm exaggerating, but it was kind of like, well, don't go near it, like it's a fucking wild animal. But we do get moose sometimes too, and it's just such a like nothing scares me more because they seem like just the most like chill animals on the planet. And then like you see videos of like, no, actually they could break down a building.
Right. Like, that's just the chill attitude is how they suck you in, and then they're like, just kidding.
Oh, it's
pretty
like,
much.
Oh, it's just a big cuddly thing that loves to shit. And like no, it turns out it's a goddamn monstrosity. So
anyway, at this point, Australian farmers are already struggling, and then they have this plague of emu. Estimates had it at the time had as many as 20,000 emu regularly hanging out at the old McDonald's place as they migrated to the coast from further inland following breeding season. So, like, I'm picturing this like emu being forced to take the guy emu being forced to take the girl emu that he hooked up with like during breeding season to a nice like beach vacation or something. She's like, come on, you never take me anywhere nice. Soon we're going to have a little emu running around. Take me to the beach.
This is a shitty emu sitcom.
So, Anyway, in order to farm in Australia, you definitely need water. And so as farming took off, the landscape began to change with all the newly cleared and cultivated land designed to suit crops and livestock, and with all the irrigation, it basically became like the perfect holiday getaway for a whole lot of migrating emu. The farmers were at their wits' end, and I mean, the emus are the kind of things that you'd like to talk shit about behind their backs like we just did for 20 minutes. But face to face are pretty intimidating, particularly when there's a few thousand of them. Unable to cope with the loitering long necks, because I love alliteration, they turn to the government. And because it's presumably the only solution governments have for any kind of crisis, they turn to the military. Many of the soldiers, or many of the farmers, had been ex-soldiers themselves, and if they've learned one thing, it's that it's way more fun shooting machine guns than it is being shot at by machine guns. Thus, they figured it'd be really fun to shoot machine guns at these emu, and by extension, that these emu would not at all enjoy being shot at, and the problem would quickly be solved. One Sir George Pierce, who was the Minister of Defense, which apparently includes defending the country from native invasion, agreed that machine guns would be an excellent solution, but with a few stipulations. The guns were to be deployed and operated by military personnel. He didn't want farmers running around with machine guns.
The bullets had to be covered in poison.
Got to make sure they're super deadly bullets. The Australian government was to pay for the transport of the troops, and the farmers would provide food and lodging and pay for the ammunition. Some of the more pessimistic folk claimed that this was all just a political stunt to make the politicians appear to actually care about the farmers, as if politicians would ever pull a highly publicized stunt just to boost their poll numbers. That never happens.
Never.
Mm-hmm. So they also insisted that the whole thing be filmed by a cinematographer from Fox Movietone. But I'm sure that's completely unrelated to the aforementioned claims of political posturing. It's like, oh, we'll help you, but we have to make sure this gets filmed so everybody can see us helping you. But this isn't about politics.
So I just can't wait for that follow-up campaign where it's like, you remember that time we completely overreacted about emus?
Did anyone else hear the Benny Hill theme song? Just me?
I'm pretty sure that's the sound emus make, is the Benny Hill theme.
All of that was just preamble to what officially marks the start of what would literally become known as the Great Emu War. Seriously, that's what it's called. You can Google it. The government sent Major G.P.W. Meredith. It's always great when you have 3 abbreviations and then a last name to head the operation. He'd be in charge of Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. God, I love names on this show.
This is your second chance to get those names right, and it might have gone worse.
It probably got them better than I did the first time. I don't know. But it might seem unwise to wage a war with only 3 soldiers, but the enemy was just a bunch of awkward-looking birds, and I guess 3 soldiers was all you needed, so that was all that was dispatched. The trio would be armed with 2 machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. On November 2nd, they hit the battlefield, prepared for their first engagement. Roughly 50 of the emu had been spotted terrorizing a field near Campion, but the wily creatures were out of range of the guns, so the locals devised a devious plan to herd the birds into a slaughtering range. But they were largely outsmarted by the tried and true run the fuck everywhere tactic employed by the emu. And you likely know this, Kelly. It sounds like you were speaking to. You can't really herd emu. They just run away everywhere.
And they're fast. They're so much faster than you think.
Fire comes out. It's actually called scorched earth tactics.
They're basically like giant versions of the Looney Tunes Roadrunner character, but
pretty much.
So a first volley of gunfire failed to down any of the birds, but a second attempt managed to kill, and I quote, a number of them. But remember, 1 and 2 are both numbers, so that really doesn't mean shit, right? We totally killed a couple, lots of them.
It's like I've been playing so much Red Dead Redemption, but I've caught myself a lot saying things that are like very Arthur Morgan Southern, like generic, and that's just what I'm picturing here is like, how many do you get? We did all right. You know, never specify it though.
We got a number of them.
Got a few.
Well, that sounds mighty fine. Later in the day, the valiant soldiers managed a chance encounter with another flock and killed, and I quote, perhaps a dozen. Which is interesting to me because they use the word perhaps, which tells you they're lying. Because if you killed them, you would know exactly how the bodies would be there.
Could be a dozen.
The bodies hit the floor.
Could be a dozen. They could have killed 12 of us. Anything could have happened.
It's weird. You're going to hear a lot of stories, but this is the official one. If it seems like the number of emus slain are a bit vague, there's a reason for that, but I'll get to that later. Anyway, 2 days after this, November 4th, for those of you keeping track, Meredith hatched a cunning plan to use a local dam as a choke point, since running around and waving your arms seemed to be an inefficient way to wrangle the emu. So
going blah, 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 and chasing after him.
Shoo, shoo, yeehaw. And then none of that was working. So they're like, well, fuck, we'll use, the natural, like, funneling properties of a narrow strip of land. He was in luck. More than 1,000 of the emu were seen heading towards the dam, presumably to take, like, selfies and buy, like, knickknacks at the gift shop. This time, the men decided to wait until the enemy was within range before firing, which is crazy, but it might be crazy enough to work. Because if you remember last time, the first volley they were way off, and they were like, fuck it, it's a machine gun, it'll work. Anyway, as the stupid birds walked stupidly right up into the cunning trap, the men opened fire. Bird after bird fell, at least for the first 12 birds. And then the gun jammed, and the emu ran the hell away. No more emu were seen or killed on that day. Out of 1,000 emu wrangled into a choke point with a machine gun, they killed 12.
I just imagine it before every emu runs away, like you hear like a pin and then a grenade drop, and they're just, oh shit.
Run away. So while the skirmish was like far from successful, those of us who believe in moral victories probably think, well, that wasn't even one of those, really. They once again were embarrassed by a bunch of birds.
Yep.
Defeated, Meredith decided to move his men further south, where he had heard claims that the emu were were much tamer, which is kind of like choosing to play hoops with your like 8-year-old niece because your buddies keep kicking your ass one-on-one. But sometimes you just need to feel like you're good at what you do. So you pick, hey, these birds sound easier. Let's go down there.
I need a win today, all right? Things haven't been going so well.
I'm starting to get the sense that Australia didn't ban guns for safety reasons, but just because they were that embarrassed.
Well, what happened is one day they brought a machine gun, tried to take down an emu. The emu got the machine gun and
started writing the laws. Yeah,
not so much the weapons got banned, but taken.
So they went further south where these tamer emus were supposed to be, but unfortunately they found little, if any, success. The birds, who would gather in massive destructive herds when there was no danger around, would shockingly break up into small groups and very quickly flee in all directions at the first sign of any danger. It's as if thousands and thousands of years of evolution had bred these birds with this weird desire to not die.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. Military observers, literally that's what they call them, military observers, who, based on the things that I read, would seem to be the only other 2 people deployed, because there was only 3 people, but who seemed to understandably want to stay anonymous at this point, noted that each pack of emu seemed to have a larger protective emu who would serve as a lookout and warn the rest of them as soon as danger approached, which is not... As I say, I literally put in my notes, perhaps they should have hired a zoologist instead of a cinematographer to follow him around, or at least someone who had seen any type of wild animal herd at least once in their life, because that is not like they wrote it down like they were captivated, like, oh my God, these birds are smart. But that's really how herds work, like pretty much all animal herds.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The school of fish.
Greater safety in numbers. That's
And there's always like even when you have like elephants and you have the bull elephants around like the outside edges of the herd that are looking for the lions. And when they see it, they alert the rest of the fucking herd. They're not just like the asshole that's like, well, I'm out of here. Good luck, guys. Like that's herd mentality.
That's a fucking lion. I ain't dealing with this. Peace.
So after a few fruitless days, Meredith decided to abandon his lay-in-wait ambush tactics in favor of mounting a machine gun to the bed of a fucking Jeep and just running the motherfuckers down.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Unfortunately for him, the birds were faster than the Jeep. And it also proved impossible for the gunner to aim and fire a machine gun mounted to a vehicle that was bouncing wildly over rough terrain while desperately trying to keep up.
If you've ever played Halo, you know this. Like...
Right. And that was the sentence that made me fall in love with the story, because you can just picture, literally, you have 3 actual soldiers bolting a machine gun to a Jeep, and they're just like, fuck it, we're going to just drive around as fast as we can and shoot at these things. And they still couldn't succeed.
I remain unconvinced that this Meredith isn't just Elmer Fudd.
If anything, he's proof that sometimes you can be a high-ranking military official for reasons other than your battle prowess.
Really?
But 6 days into the operation, some 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been fired, and many reports told of as few as 40 birds have been killed. Although some locals claimed as many as 500, presumably because they were having such a good time watching the soldiers run around with machine guns that they didn't want it to get shut down. You can imagine these farmers. I mean, your livelihood's already screwed anyway. The only excitement you have is watching these, like the Three Stooges, literally, like the Australian version, run around fighting a losing battle with emus.
You wasted all of our ammo. I'm a victim of circumstance.
However, increasingly embarrassed by the media coverage, the Australian government decided to recall Meredith and end the operation.
And declare the war a success.
Ornithologist, or if you're dumb like me, birdologist, Dominic Servantly gave what may be one of my favorite quotes of all time. Word for word, he quoted, "The machine gunner's dreams of a point-blank fire into serried masses of emus were soon dissipated. The emu command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics, and its unwieldy army soon split up into innumerable small units that made use of the military equipment uneconomic. A crestfallen field force therefore withdrew from the combat area after about a month." Which is the most bookish way to be like, these idiots couldn't succeed, so they gave up.
I'm remembering why I was so mad when the audio got fucked up when you told this story. It's so fucking good. They employed guerrilla tactics, the likes of which has never been seen in modern combat.
Right. And that goes back to what Kelly said about some of the supernatural things in the Devil's Triangle and Bermuda and all that, where now we're starting to prescribe human attributes to a bird just because we don't want to admit that we can't outsmart them.
That word dumb as fuck.
Anthropomorphic bag of dicks.
So after the military withdrew, the emu returned to their destructive ways, and the farmers once again petitioned the government for military involvement. Reluctantly, they agreed to lend the guns to local soldiers for use, but apparently there was a lack of qualified persons with experience in both machine gunnery and emu warfare, so they called in the one man who had both. That's right, Major Meredith was back, baby.
Oh, no.
God damn it. He doesn't have experience. Nobody here has experience. He can't say he has experience. He fucked up harder than anyone.
Well,
Major Meredith is that guy. That fucking guy who lied on his resume and somehow got a C-level suite, a corner office. But his entire work history is just a vapor trail.
I've killed
I'm kind of picturing Dwight Schrute from The Office, who's just he's sure that he's good at this and that he knows everything, but he really doesn't. But The only reason I can think that they would call him back out is because these farmers are like, yeah, we want soldiers again. And they're like, cool, fine, we'll do it. And then they like send out a memo to all the soldiers, like literally every person in the Australian army. And we're like, we need somebody to take out these emu. And everybody else was like, I'm busy that day, because they didn't want to be embarrassed the same way Meredith did. Meredith's like, I've got this. So anyway, they called him back in. Apparently, a report from the base commander came out that officially credited the first operation with killing 300 emu. So by the time like the dust had settled, they landed on 300, which was apparently enough to impress the higher-ups and convince them to redeclare war on the birds. The second phase of the Great Emu War, which just tickles me saying that, kicked off on November 12th. Which is like 4 days after the government ended phase 1. Like, the first time I made more of a point to point out the dates, but like, it's funny when you read these things from history and they make it sound like they occur over this like long period of time. And then you get the dates and it's like, they basically gave up and said this was a failure, we're embarrassed. And then 4 fucking days later, they're like, second phase, go back at it.
Yeah, you imagine like months of prep and shit went into this, but really it was like, we failed, so, and then a few days later, let's try again with the same guy.
That's where the ego had stepped in. I'm not going to lose to these birds.
Wait a minute, did I just write a thing saying that the emu outsmarted us? I can't.
It makes you wonder, like, he probably, like, in his memoirs, he didn't say that they gave up after the phase 1. He just said, well, it was the weekend, I took 4 days off. Like...
I need to process this. I'm going to the beach. Fuck, they're here too.
Damn it. So after phase 2 started, the first 2 days, they saw some success, killing about 40 birds, which compared to what they had killed was great. But when you remember the estimates had it up to like 20,000 emu, 40 is nothing. But after the first 2 days where they killed 40 birds, then things slowed down. But by December 2nd, the soldiers were said to have been killing as many as 100 birds per week. I'm curious how many of their like plans in the interim involved like cliffside boulders being pushed off and train tunnels being painted on the canyon walls and various anvil launching mechanisms.
Painting tunnels onto the side of like walls to make it look like the birds could run through it, and instead they run into the wall.
They've gone full on Wile E. Coyote at this point. On December 10th, Meredith was once again recalled, though this time he was hailed as a success. His final report listed 986 kills using 9,860 rounds. Which, if you're a mathematician like me, that's exactly 10 rounds per bird, which seems a little fishy to me. He also said that another 2,500 emu died later of their wounds, which is weird because wouldn't that count as shooting and killing them? Like,
no, it's little emu hospitals that keep them alive for 3 months.
It's weird.
If they're employing guerrilla tactics, I mean, it's reasonable to expect that they have high-tech medical facilities.
There's like a really sad Band of Brothers type documentary from the emu's perspective, I bet.
This is our final stand. It's
our final run and flail.
His official report has like kill rules. Like, well, my kill only really counts if they fell on the spot, but also these other ones later died. It's like I would be counting all those numbers if it was me.
The real question is, were these soldiers, were they allowed to put the little emu silhouettes?
All 986 of them. But like I said in the beginning, the measure of military success is suspect at best. I mean, it sounds like they barely killed 50 emu over the first week. And even if it were true that by December 2nd they were killing 100 emu a week, that leaves like 4 weeks between the slow weeks and the last week that they were killing emu. Like, the numbers just don't add up. And for me, like I said, it just jumps out that he would officially put in his report 986 kills with 9,860 rounds. Like, that just seems way too even and clean to to be a realistic number.
I mean, you know, as I think it doesn't sound realistic, but we've all worked for a living. Like, we've all had jobs where I think we've probably had to bullshit a number here or there. That is probably exactly what I would write. Right. No matter what happened, is like an even like 10-to-1 ratio there.
That was my guess. Is he's like, he probably looked at how much ammo they spent, because that's really easy to track because they had to pay for that. They're like, what's an acceptable amount of emu deaths for this emu? And it's like, how about one for every 10 rounds?
Right. What's a number that they're not going to like really challenge? Like, I'm not going to say like I hit every headshot, but we also didn't waste our fucking time here.
And you also have to keep in mind that the people like himself reporting the high number of emu kills had every reason to exaggerate success. Namely, these were decorated, high-ranking military men who wouldn't be particularly thrilled having a reputation of losing a war against a bunch of dumb birds. Regardless, the success or lack thereof was highly debated at the time. And so if it was debated at the time, it's probably not going to have any better information for us like 100 years after the fact, because any like actual evidence of anything is long gone by now. But one thing we do know, the locals really loved having the military gun down birds because they petitioned the government 3 more times in 1934, 1943, and 1948. But each time they were turned down. Apparently, the news of the Emu War had reached other parts of the globe, where it was also looked at as a barbaric attempt to drive an endangered animal to extinction. And the government realized that there were better ways of dealing with the emu population, namely exclusionary fences, in other words, barbed wire, and hunting programs. So that's like the end of the war. That just... those involved were like, it was a success, and everybody else is like, no, you were outsmarted by a bunch of birds.
There's probably like a really great video game to be made about the Emu Wars, though, where it's like, I'm picturing like a Dead Rising thing almost, but like really unsatisfying, where you're like rigging up a riding lawnmower with like spikes on the front trying to chase after these quick bastards, and you can't get them.
Yeah, you don't even get it. You maybe catch up to one that was already like dying,
and then that one kills you somehow.
But I love how like the farmers and the military people were like, even afterwards, and even after like, even if you use that number, the 986, and add in the 2,500 that died afterwards, again, we started with estimates of 20,000 of them. So you're talking, if we go by the exaggerated amount, maybe 15% of the birds were taken out.
If that, yeah.
Right. And so, but the people involved loved it so much that they kept going back to the government like, come on, please send that machine gun back. And the government's like, you know what? A fence would work. And they're like, yeah, we hadn't really thought of that, but can we get that machine gun, please?
Please, we have all these Jeeps. We need to strap it to it.
Please, sir, may I have some more?
May I have 10 more rounds of ammo? There's another bird.
But I suspect few things in my life are ever going to like please me as much as the mental image of those idiots on the Jeep just trying to like, fuck it, we'll just run them down. And then they're like, damn it, we can't catch up to them.
These loonies are as fast as a speeding bullet.
Faster?
You know,
given how hard they were to hit.
I would have loved it if the story actually ended by Meredith going on to like petition the army to incorporate the emus as part of their defense plan. Like, if we put little saddles on them, these fuckers are fast. Nobody will be able to keep up with us. Believe me. And can you imagine how insufferable he'd be if he was at the bar next to you, just like he's the washed out retired general drinking. He's like, those damn emus. I could have had them.
I'm just imagining one lone Australian soldier who was able to tame the emu. He's like the emu knight, and he insisted on wearing old-timey armor.
I also kind of loved when it wasn't working real well, and they're like, we'll try again. It didn't seem to ever cross their mind to send more than 3 soldiers.
I wouldn't send fucking 3. Like, to be fair, I wouldn't send one goddamn person for the emu problem.
The army is, fuck it, we got to call up the Navy.
It was the most like human nature thing I've ever heard, to be like, there's a lot of these fucking annoying birds around. Well, we need a military tactic then.
Yeah, heaven forbid the farmers actually take steps to, protect their property.
That's what I love, is that the grand like solution at the end was like, you know what? Let's try fences.
That should have been solution number one.
Right.
Australia is really flipped, like, from the rest of the world, where it's like they go in reverse. We had fences and like boundaries first, and then machine guns. They had machine guns since like the year 100, and then just discovered fences during the Emu Wars.
And the only thing probably driving them from like continuing their campaign is the cost of ammunition for machine guns back then. They're like, fuck it, this is expensive.
The farmers were just like, we'll meet you halfway. If we can mount machine guns to the fences, we'll build the fences.
And just out of curiosity, I Googled this while we've been talking about it, and the defeat was so thorough that the emu is on Australia's coat of arms.
all hail this invincible bird.
Yeah, it sucks when someone kicks your ass. You got to get a tattoo of them, like right there on your arm.
I'm picturing like when World War II broke out, they had all their like tanks and stuff, and they're like, "Fuck it, we need to tie emus to the side of these things because they're indestructible." Like, it did. One of the articles I was reading did talk about that. I mean, part of it was that they had a much harder time actually shooting the birds than they thought they would, but the other thing was that, and again, you'll be familiar with this, Kelly, that emus like have a very thick coat of feathers and thick skin, and then they're all muscle. So like you could shoot the shit out of an emu and it just looks at you like, what the fuck are you doing?
They're literal bullet sponges.
Right. So yeah, but it's just great to me. Like I could see a layman, like if you handed me a machine gun and said, here, take out this emu, I'd think, yeah, I could probably do it with a machine gun. But you'd think that like the military would have had people that would have stepped in and been like, this probably is not going to work real well. But instead they're like, fuck it, let's do it.
I mean, I spent many years of my life studying Greek mythology, and I struggle to think of a single example of hubris in Greek mythology that is as ridiculous and clear as this.
And I'll be honest, like I said, normally my technique for coming up with show topics is to just like hit Google and just like search things like, okay, weird history, funny history, like weird feuds, funniest assassinations, which is a great combination, by the way. And then so you'll come across, mostly you come across these like cracked.com lists or Ranker or whatever, these sites that just do these lists and they're like top 10 weird history things. And then you go from there. Like, yeah. And when I was scrolling through a list of some things and you see things, you're like, that could maybe be it. And then you come across the title, The Great Emu War. And I didn't even have to read anything before I'm like, that is going to be a topic. And it turned out so great. Like you said, it's just an amazing example of humanity and how we're not nearly as intelligent as we like to think we are. Especially when you hand us toys like machine guns, and all of a sudden we're just like, fuck it, shoot it.
For a second, Kelly, I thought you were going to say, like, nowhere in Greek history was there an enemy more formidable than the emu.
Hey, I would have to go double check. Maybe I can prepare that for next time.
That was actually the real battle. The 300 battle was just fucking a bunch of birds swarmed in and took out a bunch of Spartans.
The Spartans were emus. That's why they only needed 300.
Well, then that roughly cost their opponents about 300,000 rounds of ammunition.
Right.
Hence the we'll fight in the shade line.
Well.
So, yeah, Emu War. That's I'm glad I finally got to use it on a live show since we had to abandon it last time.
Yeah, well, but we'll see. This is the first time recording with a guest. So.
Right. Maybe this time cursed. And
yeah, so, thanks for coming. Hopefully people will hear it, Kelly.
Yeah, hopefully. Or not. It's a blessing / curse.
That's the best example or best quote for anything on the internet ever.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
But yeah, thanks for coming on. Do you have anything you want to plug, your Twitter or anything?
Oh God, nobody should follow me. But if anyone loses their mind, I'm Glitter Broker over on Twitter. I post semi-frequently, talk a lot about gaming because I'm a game developer, but also, have a master's degree in history. So it's a really weird intersection of things that I share and things that I talk about. And some people find it interesting, and I'm pretty sure the majority of my followers have me muted, to be honest. and they're right for doing so. If I could mute myself,
But hey, at least that's followers. You get the number attached to your name. Like, I'm still working on that. Like, I don't give a fuck. You follow me and then just delete, never go on Twitter again. Just follow me, please. I need attention.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be back next week with more shit, more shit,
stuff,
different shit. Not this shit. Right. Fuck this shit. This shit's in the past. We're moving forward.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on and letting me talk over you a bunch.
Oh, welcome to, always glad to have that happen. It's.
Yeah, certainly not a fucking huge pet peeve you'll find out all about on her Twitter about having some fucking goddamn cis white men not shutting the fuck up when she tries to talk.
I suddenly lost a follower. Weird.
I'm pretty sure I've ranted about that at least 24 times just in 2018. But
I was gonna say today, but yeah,
that's what I have a private account for.
Well, actually,
you don't. It's not a private account if it's online.
Yeah, let me explain to you how these accounts.
No, but seriously, thanks for coming on. This was fun. Yeah, we'll be back next week. See ya.
All right.
Later.